While in the past, these sotakis were frequently categorized as either more Indian, white, or African, especially by Netu, who wrote that first book, from my discussion with performers and observers of the genre, I would rather put each group, regardless of their sotaki, on a continuum of Afro-Brazilian consciousness, as each group I encountered framed the tradition as primarily Afro-Brazilian. Yet while Bumbo Meu Boi was created by lower-class Afro-Brazilian communities, there are few, if any, limits placed on opportunities for participation for members in any socioeconomic or racial group. And this is a film I took of an out-of-season Bumbo. This is Boi de Santa Fe, and I want to show this to give you just a taste of how huge these things are, these performances in these groups. This is an out-of-season performance by a delegation from this group, Boi de Santa Fe. So the main thing you want to look for is those big kazumbas with, those are huge masks, as well as you'll see the boy dancing in the middle and all the Indias and caboclos dancing around in a circle. So you see the boy here, the bull. This is a caboclo real with a huge hat. Okay. So in the sense of this, of both the mythology and this, we can also see people of all different ages and different classes here participating. Unfortunately, it's a little bit dark, so you can't see exactly. But in terms of the participation and the public participation in this, Matan Shapiro states, the active participation of the middle classes in the festivals of the people, especially Bumbo Meu Boi, is part of a process of social integration that began in the 1990s. And the immense popular participation in these activities in the rural districts is part of the improvement of living conditions in the lowest economic classes. As such, the festival demarks a space of belonging, and the coexistence of the mythic and daily reality makes sense. Unquote. Matan's space of belonging could be understood here as a shared sense of cultural citizenship through participation in Maranhense Bumbo Meu Boi. It is true that a form of social integration has been occurring within Bumbo Meu Boi groups for years, largely across class lines. This is a point that bears further scrutiny and research, however, and it's something I'd like to investigate in the future. I wasn't able to do surveys or to really spend a lot of time. It's just a narrative that's really common. But this participation is something I will return to in a moment. For now, I'd like to turn to, this isn't going to work. Okay, there we go. I'd like to turn to Tambor de Crioula. While Bumbo Meu Boi is perhaps the most central representative of Maranhense culture, the circle dance Tambor de Crioula, in this case meaning Afro-Brazilian women's drum, is more frequently performed due to its lack of attachment to any specific Catholic festival. As I said, Bumbo Meu Boi is generally conceived of as an Afro-Brazilian tradition, yet it clearly includes elements framed as European and indigenous in origin, such as we also have vaqueiros, you have elements of the plantation culture, as well as you have these clearly supposed to represent kind of mythic native figures. Tambor de Crioula, on the other hand, as its name would suggest, is considered to be completely African. And I'd like to then just give this is just a short film to give you a taste of what Tambor de Crioula looks like. If I can get it to work. There we go. I'll talk about this in a second, but you can see there's the tambor grande here, who does variations, and then these are the meu and crivador, who set down the basic rhythm, over which this guy who's playing the tambor grande, he's got the drum lashed to him so he can interact with the dancers, especially. He doesn't have to just stand stationary. Let me do that. So, as we can see from this short film, the dance consists mainly of female dancers spinning and gyrating their hips in the center, generally interacting with the drummers. And the drummers, once again, are the tambor grande and the mayo and the crivador setting down that rhythm. While practitioners of tambor de criolla can be of any racial background, the mestres are invariably dark-skinned Afro-Brazilians, and the dance is considered to be at its purest in the quilombos, or rural communities consisting of the descendants of escaped slaves. Even in the city, it is most common in districts that have high Afro-Brazilian populations, such as the neighborhood of Liberdade, which is termed an urban quilombo based on its racial composition. As a renowned tambor de criolla mestre Philip Martins, who passed away in 2008, but his terreiro, his house of tambor de criolla, is still a very prominent one. As Felipe Martins told Sergio Ferretti, tambor de criolla is, quote, a dance that was invented by the black slaves who escaped the woods and sang to entertain themselves. It is a dance of the blacks and is only good when it involves blacks, as blacks play and sing the best and are the strongest class of people in the world, unquote. In Brazil, the land of racial democracy, this would seem to be a statement laden with overtly racial politics. Yet conceptions of Maranhense culture as deeply attached to African and Aspiran diaspora culture were commonplace during my conversations with performers in São Luís. Maranhão is one of the states with the highest percentage of Afro-descendentes, people with African descent, in the country, and black cultural norms, including reggae and capoeira, as well as local traditions like tambor de criolla, are celebrated with fervor. Sansone has observed that for the citizens of Bahia, further south on the coast from Maranhão, residents attach a degree of blackness to their regional identity. Being Baiana donates a certain degree of attachment to black culture and identity. I would posit much the same for citizens of Maranhão. At the same time, when I talked with Maranhenses about black political groups like the Movimento Negro Unificado, the Black Unified Movement, they usually responded with skepticism about the totalizing rhetoric of such groups, especially the idea that someone could be 100% black in such a hybrid society. And that's actually in the local chapter of the MNU, the local group, has t-shirts that they wear that say 100% black. Besides this valoration of blackness in the genre, the religious purpose of tambor de criolla is directly related to black culture as well. Although not always evident in public performance, the dance has the religious purpose of giving praise or fulfilling a commitment to São Benedito, the patron saint of black people in the local, specifically Maranhense and the surrounding area, in the local version of folk Catholicism, also known in the Afro-Brazilian religion tambor de mina, which is also it's related to Umbanda and Candomblé, but it has more of an emphasis on the name would imply, Mina religious traditions, which is more based on Vodun worship, and that would, of course, today be Benin and Togo and parts of Nigeria. São Benedito is known in the tambor de mina religion as the Vodun Veraquete. São Benedito himself sometimes participates in the dance in the form of a small statuette, which the dancers or correiras hold against their bodies or on top of their heads while dancing. And I also have, this is actually, I unfortunately was sick, I didn't get to go to this, but my friends Fernanda, who we saw earlier, and Eduardo, who works for a new research nucleus in the city that does photographic ethnography, invited me, but I couldn't go to this. This was a tambor de criolla in a quilombo, and here you can see they're fulfilling the commitment to São Benedito by making cakes to offer to him, which then they will eat, and they also make a lot of food. But the tapioca cakes, the mandioca cakes, are the most important part, and that's part of the religious aspect. Yet, as Ferretti emphasizes, Afro-Brazilian religious forms rarely conceive of the boundary between sacred and secular to be as rigid as they are in Judeo-Christian practice. As such, tambor de criolla is also performable simply as merrymaking, sometimes in completely secular, Freudian slip, secular locations, including bars or street corners. Because of this flexibility, tambor de crioula is performed frequently throughout the year for a variety of occasions by a wide variety of people. It has become celebrated as a distinctly Marianense cultural form with deep African roots, making it a source of pride and authenticity for its practitioners and observers. I should pause here to say that while I have separated these two traditions quite markedly, many of the large performing ensembles in São Luís, such as Boi da Floresta and Boi da Liberdade, those are called urban quilombos very close to the city center, actually maintain groups that perform both, ensembles that perform both. And people who participate in one often participate in some way in the other. So if you play drums in tambor de crioula, maybe you would play matracas or play a pandeirão, that really big drum we saw in Bumbo Meu Boi. Or the women could be an India and they could be a corera in this case. Because of the importance of both genres in contributing to the creation of a distinctly Maranhense culture identity, they have both increasingly become spectacles, inhabiting virtually every available public space in the city, especially during June, during the Festas Juninas. So how and why did these traditions, at various times seen as simplistic and unworthy of note, or else subversive and needing repression, come to be sites of social integration and regional pride? The first upswings in broader public and national awareness of both of these genres was a result of Mario Andrade's folkloric research projects, which spanned large parts of northeastern Brazil in the 20s and 30s, resulting in hundreds of sound recordings, photos, and even a few videos. These included the first sound recordings of tambor de crioula and Bumbo Meu Boi songs, as well as instrumental music. Since Andrade's initial recordings, other notable Brazilian writers and social scientists have written about these central Maranhense traditions, including Edson Carneiro in the 50s and 60s and Câmara Cascudo in the 1970s. During these post-war years, the Brazilian and Maranhense governments began using the broader awareness of these traditions created by these authors to capitalize on those traditions as tourism began to take on increased importance for Maranhão. From the late 50s on, both the capital city's colonial architecture, which in the 90s was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the state's performance traditions became draws for both national and international tourists. The politically powerful Sarney family, and of course that's the family of José Sarney, who was the president towards just after the dictatorship, but also was politically powerful during the years of the dictatorship. And they have the politically powerful Sarney family, who have frequently been accused of creating an oligarchy in the state, supported the development of Maranhense Cultura Popular throughout the military dictatorship. In fact, in the album that Maranhão Tesouro Matohá was recorded on, there's a picture of him with Rosiana Sarney, the former governor of Maranhão and the daughter of José Sarney, saying that thank you for the rebirth of Cultura Popular. So politics has been very much attached to this, and this continued after the military dictatorship through Rosiana Sarney's career as governor and then senator in Maranhão at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. Despite the recent displacement of the Sarneys and their allies in the governorship by the communist candidate Flávio Dino, who was here in full regalia, and this is Boi de Maioba, another really big performing group. As Flávio Dino was elected in the most recent election, government support for and use of Bumbo Meu Boi as a political resource seems to be continuing. The cultural policies of the Lula era, though, starting in 2002 when he was elected, have had a major effect on the interaction between the state and cultural performing groups in Maranhão today. An important element of the current environment for these groups in São Luís is the incorporation of the federal government's Pontos de Cultura initiative, which began in 2004. A number of the more established performing groups in the major Maranhense performing genres, such as tambor de crioula, Bumbo Meu Boi, there are other ones too, but nothing quite this big. These groups have received Pontos de Cultura funding, they have that status. And this funding mandates that the groups do a number of things, such as procure new technology, such as computers, digital cameras, to capture and to make their presence basically broader on the internet, in media, to establish an educational element to their work, such as having workshops or education centers, and open their activities up to public participation. Maintaining Pontos de Cultura status is a regular concern, even for groups with a well-established history, including major Bumbo Meu Boi groups like Boi do Maracanã and cultural centers like Laborarte. In fact, I actually interviewed several of the leading organizers for some of these Bumba Mel Boy groups at the Secretariat for Culture, where they were having basically discussions with the incoming government about the status of their funding. Another important government cultural program in Maranhão is the Institute of National Historical and Cultural Heritage, or IFAN. IFAN is the Brazilian equivalent to UNESCO, bestowing the title of Patrimônio Cultural Imaterial, or Intangible Cultural Heritage, upon various Brazilian dance, music, and oral traditions for the purpose of recognizing their importance to those who practice and participate in them, and opening sources of funding and other support to these practitioners. Tambor de Crioula was recognized as Intangible Cultural Heritage by IFAN in 2007 in a large public ceremony attended by local government officials, as well as then Brazilian Minister of Culture, Gilberto Gil. Bumba Mel Boy was similarly recognized in 2011, but Gilberto Gil was no longer the Ministry of Culture, so it was just a local affair. Partially as a result of IFAN and other government agencies' involvement in supporting and preserving these traditions, private enterprise and local and international NGOs have stepped in to both help develop the tourism industry and to benefit marginalized populations through cultural projects. The boundaries between these different actors are not always clear, however, as funding and other support for cultural initiatives generally comes from a combination of different sponsors. For instance, a recently released book of photography and essays on the Bumba Meu Boi sotaque Zabumba and that's named Zabumba after the big bass drum, which is also used in forró, was conducted by researchers from 2 government-funded Maranhense centers for popular culture, researchers from the University of Lisbon, yet was funded by the Ministry of Culture and Petrobras, the privately traded company in which the Brazilian government holds a controlling share. And I don't know, I scanned these out of that same book, which you can see here. We have a Coro de Boi, and I talked about how much work that takes. Actually has Petrobras sewn into it. And this just says funded by or supported by Petrobras, and it's a flag that would be carried by one of these groups. Petrobras funds a large portion of the development projects for Bumba Mel Boy and Tambor de Crioula, as well as for IFAN itself, the actual processes, the books, the ethnographies, the recordings. Petrobras funds a lot of those. In addition to Petrobras, large corporations like the mining company Vale and the aluminum refining corporation Alcoa also contribute to similar projects. I should mention here, though, that even though these sources of funding and recognition, with these sources of funding and recognition, only a select few performing groups receive substantial funding. There are hundreds of groups which perform Bumba Mel Boy in the state, and upwards of 80 registered groups which perform Tambor de Crioula, making who receives funding as much a question of connections as talent and public acclaim. Yet the influx of government and private money, which has pushed these traditions to the forefront of Maranhense public life, remains an important factor in the ways the leadership of these groups craft their performances and market themselves to the public. The visibility for these traditions that has arisen as a result of these initiatives also attracts a good deal of desire for members of the middle class to participate in them. As a result of their funding from Pontos de Cultura and other government initiatives, many Tambor and Bumba Mel Boy groups hold open workshops and events to attract participation from university students, young professionals, other people in the middle class. While the organizations seek to attract this middle class participation for reasons of economics, they bring a lot of money in, and prestige, the middle class participants I spoke with primarily took part as a way of embodying what they conceived to be a distinctly Maranhense cultural identity. Regardless of motives, however, this interclass participation has created new discourses of ethics and authenticity within the negotiation of Cultura Popular in Maranhão. To participate in Bumba Mel Boy, there is generally a fee involved because of the need for long hours of instruction in dance and musical performance, as well as the intensive labor needed to create the costumes for every performer. This cost can be high, making it a substantial hardship for the lower class participants. This hardship is, of course, substantially less for middle-class newcomers, who sometimes will displace people from the lower classes who want to participate. In addition, as many of the middle-class participants are young, often high school or university students or young professionals, and they usually perform as dancers, created by lower-class Afro-Brazilian communities, there are few, if any, limits placed on opportunities for participation for members in any socioeconomic or racial group. And this is a film I took of an out-of-season Bumbu. This is Boy de Santa Fe, and I want to show this to give you just a taste of how huge these things are, these performances in these groups. This is an out-of-season performance by a delegation from the Hills. While in the past, these sotakis were frequently categorized as either more Indian, white, or African, especially by Netu, who wrote that first book. From my discussion with performers and observers of the genre, I would rather put each group, regardless of their sotaki, on a continuum of Afro-Brazilian consciousness, as each group I encountered framed the tradition as primarily Afro-Brazilian. Yet while Boom Boom Bad Boy was... So you see the boy here, the bull. This is a caboclo real with a huge hat. This group, Boy de Santa Fe. So the main thing you want to look for is those big kazumbas with those are huge masks, as well as you'll see the boy dancing in the middle and all the Indias and caboclos dancing around in a circle. Okay. So in the sense of this, of both the mythology and the we can also see people of all different ages and different classes here